When I was young, we always thought of Americans still, and I think this is a sort of British post-war idea of America as being optimistic, sunny. Obviously, Reagan tied into that when I was young. And then I think over the last 2 decades, it's fair to say America has become a more gloomy place, a more introspective and depressed place in many ways. But what I've been struck observing the Trump administration from outside is that there do seem to be attempts, and the war on DEI, the counter-revolution against DEI, particularly in academia, which is something you know a lot about, is fostering a sort of renewed hope in the American spirit. And it's something that I think foreigners, I know I do, find quite hard to understand. Can you give us a bit of your insights on that? Or do you think I'm just barking up the wrong tree?
I think there's a great backlash that, if I could sum it up in an abstraction, that people are tired of this war on the American past, on past dead Americans at Iwo Jima, D-Day, in a B-17, at this, at Bellawood or at Gettysburg. They're just tired of they're tired of seeing 10, 15 million people trying to crowd in here and then being told it's a horrible place and the founding date has to be changed. So this counter-revolution, actually, the most interesting for me about it is, if you look at the National Endowment for Humanities or the National Endowment for Art, or the people who are being considered, it's a return to classical architecture. And people will say, the FBI building is ugly. Why do we always like the Treasury building, the Supreme Court? Because it's neoclassical. Or they will say, we're going to restore Columbus Day. We don't care. He discovered America. That was an enormous heroic feat on his part. So it's an attempt to recapture our past, our tradition, our values in art and music. And for the 250th anniversary, they're trying to have videos about great battles in America and the heroic. So there's a sense that we don't have to be apologetic anymore. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be good. We're better than the alternative, and we're going to restore that. And that sense, and that appeals to a lot of people because they have family and grandparents, and when I hear every day, and I'm in academia for 50 years, a toxic masculinity, white racism, we're still hearing that all the time from the DE people. And I understand there was segregation in the South and all that, but I always think of, well, I'm named after Victor Hanson that died at Sugarloaf Hill. He was just a farmer, a kid, 21 years old. He didn't bother anybody. He was 6'3", Swedish immigrant family. And he went all the way over to Iwo Jima and fought for 19 days in hell and got killed. Or I think of my father, who grew up on the same farm with him, and he never bothered anybody. We were in the Northern California with there was no segregation. My mother fought to make sure the Japanese, she was a lawyer, did not get displaced. She was only 21. And then they sent him on a B-29, 45 missions over Tokyo. And he was never the same when I grew up after that. And so every family has these stories about what the United States did, or people in the Korean War are trying to help Europe rebuild or stop the Red Army from going across the Elbe River. But the point I'm making is, and then they hear people say, this is horrible, these people were terrible, and they only look at the downside, and everybody said, well, it was so terrible, why are you so well off compared to anybody else, and why are you so privileged? And so I think the DEI, they think it's the left says, well, this is white supremacy, or it isn't. All it's saying is, everybody is a beneficiary of people in the past, and we understand there were, given the time and place, and this was a pre-modern society compared to ours. So, of course, a lot of life was drudgery, so they didn't have the opportunities we did for social and cultural reform. But nevertheless, they were better than the alternative, and that's why we're so lucky to have that legacy. And if we don't honor and cherish it, then we're beneath them. And then the other thing is, I think, a lot of people are looking at the current culture and they're saying, you know what, you go back and use the values of the present to condemn the past, but you're wanting your generation. They're going to be 50 years from now. People are going to look at you Americans and say, you had 1 million people defecating, fornicating, shooting up, urinating right on the streets of your major cities. You had 1 million abortions a year, 20,000 of them in the birth canal. They're going to go and look at all these things. You let men come in and clobber women in volleyball and boxing and things like that. And I think that's the attitude, that they're tired of this whiny, pampered generation. And I'll just finish this rant by saying, you really see it in the universities. The universities want to fight Donald Trump, but they're like a beautiful, picturesque, mossy rock on a hillside. They look great from the outside, but they do not want to be turned over, because underneath it, it's pretty ugly. All sorts of crawling little animals and mold, everything. They have raised tuition double the rate of inflation once the student loan program gave them a guaranteed $1.7 trillion loan portfolio for their students. The students didn't worry because the government backed their debt. They have charged the federal government anywhere from 40 to 60% surcharges on individual grants, when the going rate for a private foundation was 15%. In addition to that, they're working around the Supreme Court that said that 2022 decision against Harvard, North Carolina, said you cannot use race as a basis for admissions and by extension hiring. And we all know that they have worked around it. They have received $60 billion in the last 30 years from illiberal regimes. And just this year, 500 million from communist China, or 2024, and Qatar. And now we learn that they were partnering with institutions in China, Harvard was, that may or may not have been helping to suppress the Uyghurs. So I could go on and on and on. Separate graduations predicated on race, theme houses that are not themed but racially segregated. They're doing all sorts of things that if the public is aware of it, they're going to lose. And they should just cut a deal and say, we're going to internally reform, and we need that federal money, and we'll try to do it. But if they continue this obstruction, the public will find out who they are and what they've been doing the last 30 years, and it won't help them. It won't be in their interest.
A lot of the power of DEI comes from a kind of tyranny of the mind, and people don't think they can think things or say things, and they haven't been able to. And do you think what's changing is that people now are feeling liberated from that, because they have seen that these dragons can be slayed, and in some ways they already are being slayed?
Well, in the case of the university, they have this letter all the presidents are supposed to sign that shows solidarity in obstructing the Trump reforms. But it's very funny that there's a lot of presidents, Dartmouth president, there's some here are not signing it. And the reason they're not is, I think, to kind of transition what you said, they can use the Trump administration as the bogeyman who forced these changes, and then they can internally tell their own faculty and students, well, we have anti-Semitism and we're going to look for it, but the Trump administration made me do this and cancel the Middle East Studies program. And the Trump administration said, no money, no more Saudi money. And the Trump administration said, we can't gouge the Chinese students 110%, and we've got to cut back on the number of people. 300,000 is a little bit too much. We didn't want any of this, but you can't fight them. And so, I think they feel that they had lost control of their faculty and students at places like Columbia, Princeton, Yale, and they didn't know how, you can't wear a mask. We would let you do it, but they don't want you guys masked at this. And you know what? The Trump administration said, if you go into Columbia and you trash a room and you bully two janitors, or at Stanford, if you ransack the president's office, or you destroy the sandstone columns and you spray paint them, we're just forced to file charges. We don't want to, but they said if we don't enforce criminal law on our campus, we're not going to get federal money. And so I think that's going on. They don't want to admit that, but from my observation at Stanford, that seems to be what they're really doing.
You talked about neoclassical architecture, and a lot of academics, historians, intellectuals, and so on like to compare the American story with the story of Rome. Obviously, this is your absolute area of expertise, so I'm well aware I don't know what I'm talking about. But if you were to put America right now on a sort of Roman chart, where in the experience of the Roman Republic would you put it?
Well, I just had a debate with my colleague, Neil Ferguson, at a Hoover retreat about that question. And he made the argument, and I want to be fair to him, that Trump was an Augustan figure, an Octavian, and we were at the end of the Republic, and that he was accumulating power. But I politely disagreed, because if you look at extra legality, it was the lawfare that was waged against him, or it was the effort to get him off the ballot, or it was the raid on his home, or it's these lower court judges that are trying to say they have national jurisdiction beyond their region just to wage a lawfare. But what I'm getting at is we have both sides doing this, but unlike Rome, we have an actual tripart government in the Republic. What killed the Republic was the tribunal courts were weak, and there was a Senate, but the tribal councils were weak. There was no bicameral system. And then you had two consuls, and so they were often rivals. But the biggest pathology was somewhere, I think you could start it either in 146. I think the best date would be 146, with the destruction of Carthage and Corinth, as they started to accumulate these provinces in the Balkans, in the East, in North Africa. They were wealthier than Italy in terms of natural resources, population, and these consular armies that went out there created little fiefdoms, whether it was Marius or Sulla, and when they came back, they were stronger than the Roman Senate and the existing council. So you had all of these people that were freelancing. It would be as if today the senior NATO commander in Europe had an army at his bequest of 400,000 people, and he had income from Europe to pay for it under his direction. Or there was a politician in the United States that had carved out a territory where he had tax. We don't have any of that. So we have self-correcting mechanisms. And what's different right now is, and I think it's more specific to Donald Trump, we have never had any president without any political experience or military experience become, and we had Eisenhower and people, but we've never had anybody from the private sector who has come in here. And then we've never had anybody that I can remember that offended the establishment of both parties. Donald Trump's first administration, there were active cabinet members, Rex Tillerson, James Mattis, Bill Barr at times, H.R. Good people, but they tried to either stop what he was trying to do or tried to reinterpret what he was trying to do. So we've never seen this level of opposition. And then more importantly, we've never seen a chief executive kind of been a tribune of the people. He talks like the average person, and his taste. We've never had a president that would want to be seen on TV in a garbage truck, or working at McDonald's, or eating a McDonald's burger, or going after Rosie O'Donnell, or saying that Adam Schiff is now no longer pencil neck but watermelon head. That are going. The iconic scene for me is going into Madison Square Garden. It looked like a menagerie. He came in there. He had on one side Speaker Johnson. He had Joe Rogan. He had Dana White. He had Kid Rock, Hulk Hogan, and Robert F. Kennedy. No one would ever have that assemblage around him, that entourage. So this is all new, and what it really does, and to distill what I'm trying to say, is that it is deeply offensive to our bicoastal elite as defined by the people who usually run our government. They come out of universities, they come out of the corporate boardroom, they come out of Wall Street, and when they look at this guy and who's around him, the orange hair, the skin, everything, they get repelled by him. They get repelled by his voice, his looks, the people he surrounds himself with, his vocabulary. And I think we underestimate that. But for the people the interior that was the losers of globalization. He's kind of a classical John Ford hero, a Sophoclean character. He comes in and he says, "You don't have the skill sets to solve these problems. I do. I do." And they entrust him to do the unorthodox, and it's crude. And then as he starts to be successful, people start to say, "I don't like his tweets," and that's a hallmark of the tragic hero in our fabled Western mythology. We bring these people in, they start to solve the problem, but they do it in an uncouth way because the establishment wouldn't dare use those methodologies, but they work. And I think the Republicans had got to a frame of mind where they would rather play by the Marquis of Queensberry rules and lose nobly under Romney or McCain than win ugly under Trump. And that's I think is what's going on with the fascists and the assassination attempts and all this craze. The Tesla, there's just a visceral dislike that these people that support him at these rallies. I don't know what the base is, 35-40%. These people should not be in charge of the United States. We can send them to Afghanistan. We can send them. They're good when you need them in Iraq. The white male working class died, I think, at 74% of the fatalities in Iraq and maybe 76% in Afghanistan. They only have about 34% of the demographic. So we were basically telling 34% of the demographic, you're going to go to god-awful places and die in combat, but we're going to also say you're suffering from toxic masculinity and your jobs are going to be outsourced and offshored. And that's what it's all about. That group is the base of support, and people despise that group. They really do, the elite. And I say that as someone who's speaking from a farm outside of Fresno where I grew up, but I work at Stanford University on the coast, and I can see it within a 4-hour continuum, the people at the Bay Area versus the people in the San Joaquin Valley. And it's like, I don't know, it's like two different worlds. They're not even connected.